us all to the altar. Now let us all back to the altar. And we are.
Listen, Pastor. Now preach up, preach. Preach in the
I wanna go down, river in the I wanna go down, river in the see sons and buried in the coming up, nobody fire. And we'll stand in the presence of the Lord. I wanna go down to the river and the I wanna go down to the river.
Good evening, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed that introduction because I sure did. Now we will be talking about the history of First Baptist Capeville. In 1876, two ministers, a Methodist and a Baptist, along with some Christian followers, decided to worship together. When the weather was good, they met in the afternoon under a shade tree near Cheapside and had services. One Sunday, Reverend W.H. Offer, the Methodist minister, would preach, and the alternate Sunday, Reverend Caleb Burris, the Baptist minister, would preach, when they decided a house of worship was needed for the followers. A division existed for the choice of denominations. They agreed to split, and thus Capeville Baptist Church of Dallaby and Ebenezer A.M. Church of Cheapside were born. On March 27, 1877, under the leadership of the first pastor, Reverend John Smith, Capeville Baptist Church was formed. In that year, 3 acres of land was purchased for $75. And the first church was built on the land where we sit today. 3 trustees, Fountain Booker, John Williams, and John Knight, oversaw this purchase. Reverend Smith served for a short time and was followed by Reverend T.W. Nettles. He served for 22 years. Under his leadership, our present church was completed. Around 1896, other trustees of the church signed deeds for additional land. Some of those trusted men were R.N. Nottingham and Julia Nottingham, Benjamin Trower, Curtis Ames Jr., William Jr. Spady, and Washington Spady. These names are recorded in the county deed book. During this time, the third pastor was welcomed. Reverend W.B. Sledge, he served for 7 years, and his leadership is remembered for acquiring church pews in the communion set. The fourth pastor, Reverend W.E. Tyler, served for 5 years and is accredited for leading the church in becoming debt-free. The church continued to buy surrounding lands in 1917. The church's name was first officially listed as First Baptist Church of Capeville. Trustees during this era were Annie Harrison, Wesley Ames, Drummond Spady, William Ames, Henry Wright, and Allie Ames, and George Hallett. In 1920, Reverend J.A. Martin became the 5th pastor. He is remembered as a wonderful minister and teacher. More land was purchased with the Sexton house. It is recorded that 2 members of the church, Robert and Florence Jones, were only occupants of the house, and they took care of the church. One of Reverend Martin's greatest contributions to the church is leading a great revival where 120 people accepted Christ. Most remained with the church. He served for 12 years. In 1934, after 2 years without a pastor, Reverend D.J. Black of Bower Hill, Virginia, accepted the call. He was known as a powerful speaker and a great builder. He was the 3rd moderator of the E.S. Virginia Maryland Baptist Association. He was instrumental in leading the church to financial freedom. Establishing a system of finance, building of the present church parsonage next to the Sexton house. This next house was built by Deacon Ora Spady. The old church was torn down, which had been used for meetings, to build the annex, and the anteroom was added to the front of the church. Reverend Black, the 6th pastor, served for 16 years until his death. He is the only pastor laid to rest at his beloved church in 1950. With Reverend Black's untimely death, Minister F.P. Powell, the assistant pastor, led the church for 2 years with Deacon Ora Spady. In 1952, the 7th pastor, Reverend Oscar Lacefield from Texas, was served for 5 years. He oversaw the start of construction of the choir room, pastor's study, restrooms, and the baptism pool. This was completed in October of 1958. It was 6 years before the 8th pastor was installed. Reverend J.B. Williams, who served only 11 months. One interesting point to note is Reverend Williams' great-great-great-granddaughter is a youth in the church and sings in the choir, Jaisha Savage. In 1964, Reverend C.M. Heidelberg became the 9th pastor at First Baptist Church, Capeville. The start of the present annex began. Reverend Heidelberg was known to be very charming, charismatic, elegant, and a handsome minister. He resigned after 7 years. After many years of service for Minister Frank Powell, he went from earth to his reward in 1968. 1 month later, Chairman Ora Spady passed. He has served for 50 years. Deacon Beltram Ames became chairman of the deacon board. Although First Baptist and Ebenezer AME separated many years ago, some members continue to fellowship with both churches. Deacon W.K. Knight was one of those members. He was so loved by Ebenezer that they honored him during their 95th church anniversary. Deacon Knight, who was also a trustee, rode his horse and buggy to church and to evening church meetings down the 2-way route, 13 Dirt Road. His lantern was his headlights. In 1972, Reverend John A. Seaton of Portsmouth, Virginia, was installed as the 10th pastor. He was a service-oriented man of God who created programs to encourage leaderships in the church. Senior Citizens Club, Nurse Unit, Memorial Auxiliary Day were some of the programs he instituted. Installation of a sound system and organ, internal and external renovation, purchase of a church bus, new communion set, upgrade of the deacon stand and altar. One of his greatest attributes to the First Baptist, the Eastern Shore, and the Rhode Island was the orientation of Reverend Carl H. Baylark, Jr. Reverend Seaton retired after 15 years. There was a period of time when the leadership role was vacant. Members continued to worship and serve the Lord. October 24th, 1985, a group of men organized to start a project to repair and repurchase stained glass windows. If you look around, you will see those windows with memorial messages. Heating and air conditioning units were installed. Deacons who kept the church moving were Arsenio Ames. Joshua White was a deacon for 50 years. Beltram Ames, Luther Banks, Herman Johnson, Charles Bell, Richard Swell, Tommy Ames, Bill Spady, Washington Smith, Lily Nottingham's father, and Deacon Ernest Shears, who we all remember his infamous welcome every Sunday. Welcome to the little church beside the road with the big heart. The doors to the church are always open, and who's ever let them come. Deaconess, who sported their white attire every first Sunday for communion, Isabel Carcio, Alitha Smith, Emma Ames, Lavinia Banks, Lola Spady, Mary White, Hattie Knight, Elizabeth Custis, Bertie Spady, Martha Bell, Marina Ames, and Anna Shears. Trustees who kept the church in a solid financial standing: Russell Spady, Howard Custis, Carlton Smith, who were also deacons, Elmer Lucky Ames, James Spady, Henry Ames, Arthur Pie Shot Smith, C.P. Ames, the treasurer Robert Jones, the sexton Dennis Bland, Cecile Ames, and Joseph Smith. Deacon Smith was also a church pianist, along with Sylvia Spady, Alice W. Ames, Pell Seaton, Reverend Baylard. During this time, the church did not have a pastor. Dr. H. Edward Whitaker stepped in and served the church for 11 months as the interim pastor. He was an articulate, God-fearing man of faith who returned after retiring from pastoring New Mount Hope Baptist Church in Niagara Falls, New York. Reverend Whitaker was a classmate and close friend of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He brought his friend to First Baptist in the early 50s. Dr. King preached and let it be known that he was interested in pastoring this household of faith. Dr. King was a young man, still in seminar, and he was not considered for the position. We can accredit Dr. Whitaker for guiding the church spiritually in preparation for selecting the 11th pastor. In the fall of 1989, God sent a native of the shore to First Baptist Church of Capeville. Reverend KELVIN Fitzgerald Jones was ordained as the 11th pastor of this great church. For 30-plus years, Pastor Jones has led this mindset of members to be servants of God, the community, family, and friends. The accomplishments of his leadership are numerous. During his first 10 years, members increased, Bible study and midweek services began, which encouraged the organization of youth, young adult, senior, and men ministries. Other ministries included substance abuse, health and wellness, transportation, bereavement and aftercare ministries, finance, armor bearers, and culinary. Choirs were formed in the house and in the service. New members classes were held, licensing of 3 ministers, and the late Reverend Martha Jackson, Reverend Waldo Powell, and Reverend George Holmes, and the ordination of Reverend Lisa Terry, who later became the youth minister. 10 years later, Pastor Jones continued to challenge his Bible-based church members. Tithing became an essential part of praise, and more than 85% of the members participated. Sacrificial Sundays were held, which profited the church as much as $23,000 annually. Other accomplishments included leadership retreats, community activities, feeding families, distributing clothes and toys to residents of both counties, tent revivals in troubled communities, and coordinating programs for persons with disabilities. Cosmetics of the church and needed supplies were always important. External improvements included a new roof, handicap ramp, purchase of 2 vans, new marquee, a memorial garden, and a new stable installed in honor of Tyree Taborn. Internally renovation of the church included new pews, pulpit, lectern, communion table, office equipment, and a new PA system. A volunteer leadership team was formed to maintain the upkeep of the church. Present-day officers, deacons, Chairman Charles Bell, former Chairman Earl Carlisle, Linwood Owens, and Miss Mary Peoples. Trustees, Sister Vonda Smith, Cora Staten, and the church clerk, Ani Davis. Since 2010, Pastor Jones has been committed, progressive, and instrumental in keeping the church in the forefront of worship and praise, political affairs, and community involvement, implementing cultural enrichment, youth camp, PACE Award to commemorate Dr. King's legacy and honor community leaders who embody his principles, and so much more. Continued improvement in sanctuary, remodel of the ladies' restroom, dining hall, kitchen. First Baptist has always been great. It is even greater. First Baptist hosts the National Progressive Baptist Convention, held a concert with an international recording artist, Melvin Williams, for Pastor's 20th anniversary, welcomes all races of people to the household of faith, and the church family of the Governor, Commonwealth of Virginia, Honorable Ralph S. Northam. First Baptist is proud to have a distinguished list of educators to be a part of this congregation. Miss Cherry Fishett, Miss Alice W. Ames, Miss Irene Patterson, Miss Eloise Spady Baylark Andrews, Deacon Charles Bell, Deacon Mary Peoples, Miss Dolores Nottingham, Lindsay, Miss John Waters Nottingham. Because if it were not for our educators, we would not have doctors, nurses, skilled workers, engineers, social workers, analysts, business owners, ministers, officers, and the list goes on. We are proud to have two associate pastors, Dr. Charles King and Reverend Vincent Thomas, in the dynamic music department. First Baptist is proud to acknowledge Pastor Jones and Pastor Baylark were past moderators of the association.
I am Deacon Charles Bell, and I'm going to do a brief history of the First Baptist Church of Capeville, Virginia. I have been a member for several years at First Baptist, and I came from the service on a ship called the USS Upshur. And I asked the chaplain, what must I do to be saved? And he told me, all you have to do is believe. And he asked me, did I believe? And I said, yes. And he said, you are saved. And from then on, I have been serving the Lord. During the last quarter of the century, a group of Negro Christians of the Northampton County, Virginia, would hold regular church services every Sunday afternoon under what was then called an oak tree. Eventually they saw a need for a building to protect them from the weather. And when they were thinking in terms of building, there became a division as to what denomination they would have. And from that division, two churches were formed. First Baptist Church, namely First Baptist Church Capeville, and Ebenezer, a church of Capeville. And that was in 1886. And from that group, they built a church. The Reverend John Smith was the pastor of that church. When I first began to visit, and also when I was accepted as a member, the church did not have indoor plumbing, did not have heat and air conditioning. In the church, there were two what we would call pot-belly stoves, one on each south end and one on the north end, which were burning coal, and we had a person that was a janitor that would take care of that, and his name was Robert Lee Wilson. Since then, we have all of the indoor plumbing that we, modern plumbing, heating and air conditioning, and also we have an annex which was added to the church. The church has grown spiritually, structurally. In September of each year, we would have a revival, and of course, people would, need to have been baptized. And what we would do, we would go to Pig's Harbor, which is actually the Atlantic Ocean, where they would be baptized. And of course, now we have, of course, an indoor pool. But that's what we had to do. The steeple was changed, restructured. As a matter of fact, years ago, pigeons used to be up in the my brother Willie, Maurice Wilson, and myself caught pigeons, and we cleared them, and then they blocked it so the pigeon couldn't come. And so the steeple has been changed and, of course, restructured. And the front of the church was renovated, and the railings and the steps were installed by a contractor by the name of Maurice Weeks. And we also, of course, have a recreation, I would call the building, we call it the annex, that was added. During the time that First Baptist Church Capeville had a vacancy, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King came and he preached at First Baptist Church, Capeville, Virginia. What a time it would have been had he been accepted by First Baptist. And not only that, I met the late Dr. Martin Luther King in Richmond, Virginia, one time when the Virginia Education Association met in Richmond, Virginia, and I had an opportunity to shake his hand. It was a glorious event. Eventually, we decided to develop a committee which was called a search committee. And what the search committee was supposed to do was to check around the neighborhood and elsewhere for an individual that would become the pastor of the church. Lo and behold, there was a minister, young minister, from Bethel Baptist Church by the name of Reverend KELVIN F. Jones. And he was the third person that we had interviewed. And the search committee said, this is the man that we want. Out of the three people that we had interviewed, Reverend KELVIN F. Jones was selected, and we presented to the church. And the church overwhelmingly decided to call Reverend KELVIN F. Jones. The search committee and the church gave me permission to write a letter to Reverend Jones to invite him to become the pastor of First Baptist Church of Capeville. Fortunately, Reverend Jones has been with us for 34 years, and 34 of good spiritual years. And the church has grown structurally and spiritually since then. We're thankful for God for enabling us to have the pastor that has done so much for the church, not just for the church, but for the community.
Good afternoon. My name is Iris Downs. A lot of you all will remember me as Iris Downs Baker. I will go back to my earliest recollection of First Baptist Church, Capeville. I was raised in this church by my grandparents, Eliza and Cecil Ames, better known as Cheapside, Virginia. My first recollections go back to starting off with the year 1950, the Reverend Black. Secondly, I remember Reverend Oscar Lacerfield. Thirdly, Reverend Heidelberg. Fourthly, Reverend James Williams. The parsonage was full of children. And last but not least, our own Eastern Shore, Reverend KELVIN Jones. During Reverend Black's, I knew that every Saturday afternoon he would be by to pick up his dressed chicken, which I had to pick the feathers off of. Lacerfield, I remember him baptizing in the bay, and he got happy and threw the Bible in. Heidelberg, he was cool. Always had his watch on backwards, looking at it. All the little men, First Baptist Capeville, started imitating him. Next, Reverend Williams came in. He had more children in the parsonage than anybody else we had ever had. Behind him, it was Reverend STATEN. When you think of STATEN, you think of military. And next, our own Reverend KELVIN Jones, the Eastern Shore's finest. I remember also in the late 1980s and early 1990s, we had Future Outlook Club, Miss Maddie Branch, Shirley Ames, to name a few. And it was always about the beautification of the church and raising money to beautify the church with. They planned large programs. Had busloads of people coming in from Philadelphia. Money was tight, but it was right. And thus we began our journey of all the homecomings. All the churches started falling down behind us. It was just a big homecoming where they raised money and they brought it home to support their home churches. And summing it all up, I say, thanks for the memory and happy 147th anniversary and many, many more. To God be the glory for the good things that he has done.
I came to First Baptist Church in June of 1989. I was actually at that time employed at the Sheriff's Office in Northampton County. I was working on the shift work as a jailer. I received a call at the jail from Deacon Charles Bell to inform me that there were 3 persons candidating for Capeville at the time, and I ended up being the one with the most votes. At that time, I became pastor. After receiving that call, speaking with Reverend Baylark, I met with him and we began the process of ordination and installation. Upon my installation as pastor of First Baptist Church, when I initially came to the church, we had approximately 25, 30 people attending at the time. And Deacon Joshua White, who was a longtime member of the church, there was $400 in our treasury, and $200 of that was earmarked money, and which meant that it was money that the choir actually had charge of. And the agreement was to pay me $200 a week. I knew then we were I had to come up with an immediate plan to generate income into the church. And I can remember one officer telling me, a trustee told me, Pastor, well, you know, there's some Sundays we ain't been able to pay the preacher for the lights. And I shared with him at that time we were having service at 11:30. I said, well, we can have service at 11:30 without lights, but we can't afford not to pay the preacher. I had taken a significant cut to pastor First Baptist, but it was a cut that was worth it because it was a calling on my life that God had shared with me that I needed to do, and it compelled me to go forth. And so I started pastoring the church. After a few Sundays, or maybe a year or so, I came up with a plan of a Try God Sunday that I had gotten from my old church and from Pastor Balog, and I taught on tithing for a significant number of Sundays. I used examples of apples, oranges, and some Sundays I gave out money and sharing with them, if you give God 10% of that and you keep 90, you are always the benefactor. And as a result of teaching and preaching for a series of Sundays on tithing, our offering went from like $400 or $200, $400 a Sunday to, I think the first Sunday we tried to Try God Sunday, we were at $8,000 or $9,000. And after that, it kind of leveled off. And so God was significantly good to us as we then began to just do ministry. We had several, ups and downs as the ministry started in the first few years, making the adjustment of them having a new pastor, a young pastor, and some people being in positions and not willing to change. So we had to shake up things. And then after about 7 years, things leveled off, and First Baptist just began to do all kinds of ministry. People were coming, people still come. We were on the road all the time, just going here, there, preaching everywhere. God has blessed us to travel to New York, Rhode Island, New Jersey. We've been to Delaware. We've just been significantly a lot of places. Also, one of the things that was very meaningful for us in the ministry is that there came a time when the church was really moving and shaking, and we needed transportation. And so I was given money to go buy a van, and I went to the dealership in Chesapeake, and they had 2 vans instead of 1, and they wanted more than I had. And I said to the dealer, will you sell me 2 vans for this particular price? And the dealer said, there's no way I can do that. And I said, well, I have a check right here that will give you this amount of money. And he said, I just can't do it. And I said, well, that's fine. I said, somebody in Virginia Beach wants to sell a van today. So I started toward the door, and he said, you're really serious? And I said, yes. And so we made the deal, and I got 2 vans for the price of 1. I actually had to call to get somebody to come over, bring somebody and come over to get the other van, and we came back home with 2 vans instead of 1, and we traveled significantly. All throughout that time of new pastor, at a time when, there was always this bickering in churches between deacons and pastor. I did not encounter that from my chairman, which was Charles Bell, when I came, and he still is. I never had that encounter with him. And so we were able to do ministry here and do it well. And God has blessed our ministry. We have seen significant growth, significant change. Fast forwarding, we went to COVID, and many churches went to live streaming their services from home, pastors preaching, which was, I'm old, so it was not my cup of tea. and I had to find an alternative to still have worship. And our worship, we ended up building a pulpit outside and having people to come to worship, drive their cars, stay in their cars. We had an FM transmitter at one time when we started. Then we just started doing the PA system, the music ministry. Every Sunday we would come and make sure things were set up outside as we began the ministry. And out of that, we were featured in several articles. One of the articles that I was most pleased with was our article from former Governor George Allen, who was on Mike Pence's, Vice President Mike Pence's task force, wrote an article about a church that was changing the community and changing lives through COVID, because at that time we had just most of the churches were closed, so people were coming, whites, blacks, you name it, they were coming. And I remember one Sunday standing and saying, this is what heaven ought to look like, a mixture of people, not divided, but a mixture of people. And when it was time to come back in, we came back in, and our church never skipped a beat. Many churches struggled because they stopped coming to the sanctuary, but we still came even though we were outside. And so people never got out of the habit of coming back, coming to church. During my tenure as pastor, I had the opportunity to serve as the pastor to the governor of Virginia, and I'm grateful for that. I'm the first African-American pastor who has ever served as governor, pastor to a white governor in the state of Virginia. And so we went through our valleys and highs there, but we came out stronger and wiser and better, and the church received, it was a pleasure having the governor serve as a member of our church. And lastly, I guess one of the more significant things of this whole ministry has been after we came back inside from COVID, after all of that, the Saturday before the Super Bowl of 21, I ended up with a stroke and was out of the pulpit for 8 weeks. There were no signs of a stroke, did not know I had a stroke. Usually you have 3 or 4 hours and you have some deficits, and I went a week and a half before I realized that I really had a stroke. I thought I had vertigo, and they did MRI on my second visit to the hospital, and come to find out I had a stroke. I'd never been hospitalized in my life. Then I was transferred to a rehab center during COVID. I was not allowed to go out of that room, as no patients were because of COVID. I was there from a Saturday to a Thursday morning, I believe, and I just told the doctor, I can't stay here, I'm checking out. And I left the hospital and got home health care and worked through that process. And after 8 weeks of being absent from the church, I came back to church, sneakily hid in my office on a Easter Sunday morning, and they were having prayer and praise, and I was able to walk out of my office, and the church and it was great jubilation. I actually wasn't supposed to be preaching, but I preached that Sunday morning. I decided I would preach every other Sunday, but after I got back in the saddle, I ended up preaching just about every Sunday and a half, except for those Sundays that I have someone else preach for me. But the ministry has been good. God has blessed us. I've had 34 good years, and it remains what shall come to pass.
I started going to First Baptist Church. I was a little girl. I can't really remember what age I was, but I started coming here with my grandmother, Miss Annie B. Smith. From there, as far back as I can remember, I've always been active in the church as a child growing up. We had Sunday school, and we would ride the van here with Mr. and Mrs. Carlisle. They would pick up all the kids from Cheapside, Kip the Peak, everywhere. We would all pack on his little black van. They would bring us here to Sunday school. Here at First Baptist is where I started learning Black history. Miss Collins was our Sunday school teacher, and she taught us so many things about the Bible. We learned the books of the Bible. We learned people in the Bible, and she made it so like vivid and exciting. Christmas time, we would always do Christmas plays. I can remember Black History Month, she would give us people, like different people in Black history, and we would have to like research the person and write a paper and bring it to her, and she would overlook it and stuff. And then we would have our Black History program, and the same was with Christmas and Easter. When I started coming to this church, Reverend Seaton was the pastor, and Reverend Seaton baptized me. I remember I got baptized on one Easter Sunday morning during sunrise service. After Reverend Seaton, we had like different people, pastors come back and forth. Then we had Reverend Whitaker, and he was what they call like an interim pastor, and he was with us for some years, I think. And then, of course, we had Pastor Jones come, and like all through my childhood growing up here, like kids, children, the youth, the church was always full with youth, and the church gave us a voice. But when Pastor got here, of course, he was younger, and so he gave us leeway to do like more things. We had like our children's choir, of course, on certain Sundays would be our Sundays. We would conduct service, worship leader, pray, scripture. He opened us up to like so many different things. He would get out on the churchyard and play soccer with us, take us different places, and he just exposed us to so much. Growing up here, it's like I kind of transitioned from me being a youth here in church and stuff to having my own kids and my own children participating here at First Baptist. It's just been, over the years, we've done like so much. And if one thing I can say about this church and its history is that we have always been a church that's not just for the who comes to worship here, the people that stay inside these four walls. We are a church of community, and we get out in the community and we do things in the community. Anybody is welcome here. Under Pastor Jones' leadership, you don't have to be a member of the church to participate in church. We have done different activities in the community and stuff. And one thing we've learned is that church is not just the building. Even though we love the building, we take care of the building, and the building has a major significance in us. Church and ministry is what goes on outside of the building, what you do in the community, who you serve in the community, the things that you do in the community. During COVID, when we couldn't worship in the sanctuary, it was, different, but we still had worship. I think some of our most powerful moments was right out there sitting in our cars, and when weather permitted, we would bring lawn chairs and sit out in the lawn and stuff. But worship was, authentic, and we had so many people from different backgrounds, different religions and stuff, but everybody met out there on the churchyard. And once we came back in the sanctuary, and post-COVID, as I would say, church is different, but we still are doing ministry. And I'm proud to be a member of this church. This church is deeply rooted in my family, and I love where I worship. I I love the growth and the teaching that I have received here from a child and now to an adult. And I just hope that we continue to grow and continue to do ministry that is meaningful, not only for the parishioners inside the building, but for the community at large.
Fire, fire, wheels, wheels, wheels.